She was kicked out after her husband's death. Everyone thought she was gone for good. But years later, she returned with shocking proof that turned everything upside down. What she revealed would leave them speechless. It was a night that should have been ordinary, but it was far from it. The grand mansion, nestled on a quiet hill overlooking the city lights, looked almost too perfect. A family dinner had been arranged to mark the anniversary of Thomas's death, but for those present it was anything but a peaceful evening. 4 years had passed since his sudden passing, but the wounds within the family remained as fresh as the day they were inflicted. Lily, his widow, sat at the back of the room, her presence barely acknowledged by anyone else. She had been kicked out of the family estate shortly after Thomas's death. The matriarch, Margaret, had always been cold and dismissive toward her, but after Thomas's death, the family had done everything to push her out. No one believed that Lily had truly loved him, and the whispers behind her back had made it nearly impossible for her to stay. Still, she had fought to maintain her dignity, refusing to air her grievances publicly. Yet tonight, something had changed. She had come back, not as the defeated widow who had been forgotten, but with a quiet, steely resolve. As Margaret sat at the head of the table, eyes glinting with control, her son Robert and daughter Kate flanked her on either side. Robert, the eldest, had always been the one to carry the family name. He had taken control of the family business with ease, following in his father's footsteps as if it was his birthright. Kate, on the other hand, had always stayed in the background, quietly watching everything unfold without ever challenging the status quo. Lily's return had been unexpected. After all, who would expect a woman who had been discarded so cruelly to come back? But there she was, standing at the door of the grand dining hall, her expression calm yet filled with something deeper, something that had been building for years. Her heart had ached for so long, but now she had come to claim what was rightfully hers, and she would no longer be ignored. "Lily, you're here," Margaret said, her voice dripping with feigned surprise. There was no warmth in her tone, only the slightest hint of disdain. "I wasn't expecting you tonight." "I wasn't planning on coming," Lily replied quietly, "but I think it's time we have a conversation." Everyone in the room went silent. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Margaret looked at Lily with narrowed eyes, but she said nothing. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing the tension in the air. Kate, ever the observer, looked between her mother and Lily, sensing something was off, though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Lily didn't waste any time. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small folder, one that held something no one in that room was prepared for. The family had always believed that Thomas had died from a heart attack. That was the official story they'd all accepted. But Lily had known something wasn't right. The years spent trying to put the pieces together had led her to something far more shocking than anyone could have imagined. "I have proof," she said softly, her voice steady but laced with undeniable certainty. "Thomas didn't die that night." The room seemed to hold its breath. Robert's face went pale, and Kate looked like she was trying to make sense of what she had just heard. Margaret's lips twisted into a thin line, and she folded her arms over her chest as if bracing herself for what Lily would say next. "I've been quiet for long enough," Lily continued, "but after years of silence, I'm done hiding. I didn't just lose my husband that night. I lost everything, my home, my place in this family, my dignity, but I didn't lose the truth." Lily handed the folder to Robert. He hesitated, eyes flicking between his mother and Lily, unsure of what he was about to uncover. Slowly, he opened it. What he saw was a series of photographs, some old, some recent, along with documents and financial records that painted an entirely different picture. The first photograph was of Thomas, alive and well, taken only a few months after his supposed death. Robert's hand shook as he turned the page, his mind struggling to make sense of the images in front of him. Lily's eyes never left Robert as he flipped through the pages. "You've been lied to," she said, her voice now rising with a hint of anger. Everything you thought you knew about your father, the truth you were so desperate to protect, was a lie. Your mother knew. She knew all along." Margaret stood up abruptly, slamming her hand on the table. "Enough of this nonsense," she spat. "What kind of game are you playing, Lily?" "This is no game," Lily said, standing tall now. "This is about the truth, and it's about time you all knew it." Margaret's face flushed with anger, but there was something else behind her eyes. Fear. She could see the tables turning. She had always been the one in control. But now, Lily held the upper hand. Lily knew things about Thomas's death that no one else did, things that threatened to unravel the family's carefully constructed narrative. "You think you can come here and tear everything apart with these pieces of paper?" Margaret sneered. "You think anyone will believe you?" "I don't need anyone to believe me," Lily responded. "I only need you to face what you've been hiding." The tension in the room was palpable as Robert and Kate exchanged looks. Robert, still processing the evidence, shook his head in disbelief. "Why, Mom?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. "Why didn't you tell us?" Margaret's eyes darted from one child to the other, trying to maintain her grip on the situation. "Because I had no choice," she said, her voice shaking now. "Your father wanted to protect us. He wanted to keep the business safe. It wasn't the right time for him to come back." "Protect us?" Lily repeated, her voice low and dangerous. "Protect us from what? A business he built on lies?" The silence that followed felt suffocating. Kate, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. "What are you saying, Mom?" Her voice trembled, but there was something resolute in her eyes now. "Did you know about this? Did you know he faked his death?" Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands trembling slightly. She refused to answer, but the guilt was written all over her face. "Thomas wasn't dead," Lily said again, "and I can prove it. He's been alive all these years. He was hiding, trying to escape the mess you created. You didn't want to lose everything, so you convinced everyone that he had died. And when I found out, I had to stay quiet. I had to wait for the right moment." The room was still, no one daring to speak. Robert had pushed the papers aside and stood up, his face a mask of confusion. "So what now? What do we do with this?" "Now," Lily said, her voice steady, "we take back what's rightfully mine, what should have been mine all along, and we figure out what to do with all the lies you've been living." Robert's eyes flicked to his mother and then to the documents in his hand. His face fell, a weight settling on his shoulders. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Lily turned to Margaret. "The truth always comes out, Margaret. It's just a matter of time." Margaret stared back at her, her expression hardening. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything from me? You think you can destroy this family?" Lily's lips curled into a small, sad smile. "I'm not destroying it, Margaret. You did that years ago. I'm just finishing what should have been done." The truth, it seemed, had finally caught up with them. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity. Robert stood motionless, staring at the folder in his hands, his mind reeling. He couldn't wrap his head around the fact that his father, the man he had looked up to, had not only faked his death, but had also lied to all of them. The family legacy, everything he had worked for, now seemed built on a foundation of lies. His eyes flicked from the documents to Lily, who stood with quiet determination, as if she had known this day would come. Margaret's voice broke the silence, sharp and cold. "You're not going to get away with this, Lily. You think you've won? You think you can walk in here and expose our family's secrets just like that?" Her tone was venomous, but there was something more. Panic. It was clear that the matriarch, who had always controlled the family with a tight grip, was losing her composure. "I'm not here to win anything, Margaret," Lily replied calmly. "I'm here to show you the truth. You've kept it hidden long enough. You don't control me anymore." Margaret's face turned red, her eyes blazing with anger. She took a step toward Lily, but Robert's voice cut through the tension. "Stop," he said, his voice firm yet strained. This isn't helping." Turning to Lily, Robert's face softened with uncertainty. "I don't know what to believe. I thought my father was gone. I thought—" He trailed off, his voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" Lily's expression softened, but she didn't flinch. "I tried, Robert, but you wouldn't have believed me then. You all had your own lives to live, and I couldn't risk losing the last piece of Thomas I had left. I wanted to make sure I had everything in place before I confronted you all." Kate, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up. "So, what now?" Her voice was small but held a certain quiet resolve. "What happens to all of us now?" Lily looked at Kate and then at Robert, her eyes serious. "Now, you all have to decide what kind of family you want to be. Do you want to keep pretending everything is perfect? Or do you want to face the truth and rebuild?" Margaret scoffed, her hands trembling. "You're insane if you think we're going to just let you waltz back in and destroy everything." Lily's gaze remained steady. "I'm not trying to destroy anything. I'm trying to rebuild it, to bring this family back from the ashes of what your lies have done." As Margaret opened her mouth to argue, a sudden voice from the doorway made them all freeze. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned to see a figure standing in the doorway. It was Thomas. Lily's heart skipped a beat as she looked at the man who had supposedly died all those years ago. He stood there, looking exactly the same as the last time she had seen him, his face calm, almost unreadable. For a moment, no one moved. The silence was thick, and the weight of the moment seemed unbearable. "Thomas?" Robert's voice trembled as he took a step forward. How are you here?" Thomas looked at his son and then at Lily. "I'm here because it's time for the truth to come out," he said quietly, his voice steady but filled with regret. "Lily was right. I didn't die that night." Margaret's face twisted with disbelief and fury. "You— what? How could you?" Her voice was shaking now, a mixture of anger and betrayal. "You left us all, and you didn't even have the decency to tell us the truth?" Thomas took a deep breath, as though the weight of years of secrecy was finally starting to catch up with him. "I didn't leave you, Margaret. I left the situation. I had no choice. There were things happening behind the scenes, things that would have destroyed everything we built if I hadn't disappeared." Lily stepped forward now, her voice firm. "Thomas did this for the company, for all of you. But it was a mistake, a dangerous mistake, and now we have to deal with the consequences of it." Thomas's eyes met Margaret's, and for the first time, there was a flicker of guilt in his expression. "I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I didn't trust anyone to keep the company safe from what was coming." Lily could feel the shift in the room as the reality of the situation started to sink in. There were no more lies to hide behind. The truth was out, and the family was going to have to face it. Robert looked between his parents and Lily, his mind racing. "So what now? What do we do with all this? You've been gone for years, and now we find out you're alive, and everything we've built." He shook his head in disbelief. "It's all a lie." Lily didn't answer right away. She turned to Thomas, who looked more vulnerable than she had ever seen him before. "We rebuild, Robert," she said finally. "We start fresh, from the ground up. No more secrets, no more lies." But Margaret wasn't ready to accept that. "You can't just come back in here and think you can take control, Thomas," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "You've already broken everything. You can't just walk back into our lives like nothing ever happened." Thomas's expression softened. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Margaret. I don't even expect forgiveness from you, Robert, or Kate. But I'm here now, and I want to make things right." The room was heavy with emotion. The walls that had stood firm for so long seemed to crack under the weight of the truth. No one knew where this would lead, but one thing was clear. The Sterling family, once untouchable, was about to change forever. The room was thick with tension. Robert stood frozen, his mind whirling, his father alive, standing before him, as though nothing had changed. Everything he thought he knew about his family and his life had just shattered in front of him. The man who had built their empire, the man he had idolized, had faked his own death. All these years, Robert had mourned a lie. "I don't understand," Robert muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why, Dad? Why did you leave us? Why didn't you tell us the truth?" Thomas sighed deeply, his face weary, as though the weight of years of deception had worn him down. "I never wanted to leave you, Robert. I didn't want to leave any of you. But when the time came, when everything started unraveling, I had no choice. It wasn't just my life at risk, it was the whole family's future. If I had stayed, if I had faced the charges and the fallout, everything we built would have been destroyed." Lily's eyes softened as she looked at Thomas, seeing him for the first time not as the man who had abandoned her, but as a man who had been trapped by his own choices. "We both know it wasn't just about saving the company, Thomas," she said quietly. "There was more going on. You were hiding, not just from the law, but from your own family." Thomas avoided her gaze for a moment, and Lily could see the shame in his eyes. He knew she was right. The truth wasn't just about saving the company, it was about escaping the consequences of the life he had built, one based on power, manipulation, and fear. Margaret's voice sliced through the air, sharp and accusing. "So what now, Thomas?" she spat. "You come back here and expect everything to be forgiven? You expect me to just accept this, to forget that you abandoned us all those years ago?" Thomas's eyes locked with Margaret's, and for the first time in years, there was a flicker of vulnerability in his expression. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Margaret. I'm not even asking for your approval. But I need to fix this. I need to make it right." Margaret scoffed, shaking her head. "You've already ruined everything. The damage is done, and now you think you can just waltz back in and take control of the family business like nothing happened?" Lily, who had remained silent up until now, stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but there was an underlying strength that made it impossible to ignore. "Margaret, the damage was done long before Thomas disappeared. It was done by the lies, the secrets, and the power games you've played all these years. Thomas didn't ruin this family. You did. You pushed me out, you manipulated everyone, and now it's time for things to change." The words hung in the air, and for a moment Margaret seemed taken aback. She had never expected Lily to speak so boldly, to confront her so directly. But Lily wasn't afraid anymore. She had lived through the pain of losing everything, and now, with the truth in her hands, she was ready to take back what had been stolen from her. "I don't know what you're trying to do here, Lily," Margaret finally said, her voice quieter, but no less venomous. "But I won't let you tear apart what we've built. I won't let you ruin this family, not now, not ever." Lily's eyes softened, but there was a steeliness behind them that couldn't be ignored. "You've already ruined it, Margaret, but I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to rebuild what we had, to fix what's been broken, if you're willing to let me, that is." The silence in the room was deafening. Robert shifted uncomfortably, looking between his mother and Lily. He had always been the one to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, but now it seemed there was no avoiding the truth. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Dad," Robert said, his voice filled with anguish. "You've taken everything from us, everything I believed in. I don't know if I can trust you again." Thomas nodded slowly, as though accepting the weight of his son's words. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Robert, not right now, but I want you to understand why I did what I did. I was trying to protect you, protect all of us." Lily looked at Thomas, her expression softening for a moment. "But in trying to protect us, you lost everything, and now we have to pick up the pieces, we have to rebuild." Robert, still in shock, stared at his father. "And what about the business, Dad?" "What happens now?" Thomas's face darkened, his jaw clenching. "That's up to all of us. We've spent too long letting the wrong people lead. We've let the wrong values take over. It's time to change that." Lily stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "We have the chance to make things right. But it's not just about business. It's about what kind of family we want to be. It's about the legacy we leave behind." Margaret sneered, clearly not ready to accept the shift in power. "You think you can just walk in here and take over everything, Lily? You think you can turn this family upside down?" Lily met her gaze, unflinching. "No, Margaret, I don't think I can take over everything. But I'm not going to let you destroy everything either. This family belongs to all of us, not just you." For the first time, Margaret faltered. The matriarch, who had controlled everything with iron fists, seemed to shrink in the face of Lily's determination. She had always assumed she would be the one in charge. But now she saw that the tide was turning, and she had no choice but to face it. "I've already lost everything," Margaret said quietly, her anger giving way to something else, something more fragile. "But I'm not ready to let go yet." Lily shook her head gently. "You don't have to let go, Margaret, but you do have to share. This family needs more than just power and control. It needs honesty, trust, and love." The room was heavy with unspoken words. Robert, his face still conflicted, turned to Thomas. "So what now, Dad? How do we fix this?" Thomas met his son's gaze, his eyes tired but resolute. "We fix this together. We face the truth, we rebuild, and we make sure this never happens again." Lily nodded, her heart pounding as she realized that this was the beginning of something new. They had all been living in the shadows of lies for too long. But now the truth was finally out, and they had the chance to start over. The days following Thomas's return were strange, filled with the clamor of a family trying to piece together what had been shattered. The mansion, once a place of quiet opulence and hidden secrets, now seemed like a battlefield. Every conversation was laced with tension, every word a potential trigger for the fragile truce that had been established. Robert still didn't know how to feel. One moment, he felt the weight of betrayal too strongly to bear. The next, he was reminded of the father he had once admired. Lily had settled back into the house, but the atmosphere between her and the others was anything but peaceful. Margaret had retreated into herself, refusing to speak much, while Robert tried to reconcile the man he had known with the stranger who had returned. Kate, who had always been quiet and observant, kept to herself, torn between her loyalties to her family and the uncomfortable truth that had surfaced. Lily knew the coming days would be pivotal. She had waited long enough, and now she needed to act, before the family crumbled under the weight of its own secrets. As she walked through the halls of the mansion, she couldn't help but feel the old familiarity. But there was something different now. It felt like a place she once knew, but no longer belonged to. That morning, as the sun rose and cast a golden light through the windows, Lily sat in the study, papers spread out before her. She had been reviewing the documents that had uncovered the truth about Thomas's death, and the more she read, the clearer it became. There were financial documents, insurance claims, and hidden transactions, things that proved Thomas had been more than just protecting the family. He had been running from something much larger, something that threatened to destroy not only him, but everyone involved. The door creaked open, and she looked up to see Robert standing in the doorway. His face was still a mixture of confusion and anger, but there was a softness in his eyes now, a silent acknowledgement of what had happened. "Mom wants to see you," Robert said quietly, his voice tense. "She's been asking for you." Lily nodded, standing up from the desk and gathering the papers together. "I'll be there in a moment," she replied, her voice calm. But inside, her heart was racing. Margaret had been uncharacteristically silent, and Lily knew that silence was never a good sign. As she walked through the grand hallway toward Margaret's study, she couldn't help but wonder what was going through the woman's mind. Margaret had always been the pillar of the family, the one who controlled everything with a practiced ease. But now her world was falling apart. Everything she had worked for, every decision she had made, was under scrutiny. The empire that had been built on lies was now unraveling, and Lily was at the center of it all. When Lily entered Margaret's study, she found the matriarch sitting at her desk, her hands clasped tightly together. Margaret's expression was unreadable, her gaze fixed on the papers in front of her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Margaret looked up at Lily, her eyes hard but weary. "I've been thinking," Margaret began, her voice low, "about everything, about how we got here, and about what happens next." Lily took a seat across from her, folding her hands in her lap. She knew this conversation was inevitable. Margaret was always the one to take control, but now Lily could see the cracks in that facade. "What do you want, Margaret?" Lily asked softly. "What is it that you want from me?" Margaret's eyes flashed with a hint of something, frustration, perhaps, or fear. "I want this family to stay together. I want what we built to remain intact. But it's clear that you and Thomas—" She faltered, struggling to find the right words. "It's clear that everything has changed." Lily leaned forward slightly, her voice steady. "It has, Margaret. Things can't stay the same anymore. This family can't stay the same. We've lived under the shadow of lies for too long. The truth is out now, and we have to face it." Margaret clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white. "You think this is easy for me?" she snapped. "I've spent years building this family, this company. You don't understand the sacrifices I made to keep everything together. And now you come back and expect me to just let go?" Lily remained calm, her gaze unwavering. "I'm not asking you to let go, Margaret. I'm asking you to face the truth. We need to rebuild, yes, but we need to do it honestly. We can't keep pretending everything is perfect when it never was." Margaret's expression softened just slightly. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Robert entered the room. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there watching the two women, a silent observer in a battle that he didn't fully understand. Margaret turned to her son, her expression still tight. "What is it, Robert?" "I've been thinking," Robert said slowly, looking at both of them. "Maybe we're all wrong. Maybe none of us knows how to fix this." His voice was quieter now, more reflective. "But maybe it's time for a new way. Maybe we all need to change if we want this family to survive." Lily's heart tightened at his words. Robert had always been the one to keep the peace, to keep the family together. But now he was seeing the truth, and that truth was going to force them all to change. Margaret's gaze flickered between them, and for the first time she seemed uncertain. "So what are you suggesting, Robert?" she asked, her voice softer now. "I'm suggesting that we stop pretending," Robert said, his voice steady with growing conviction. "We stop holding on to the past, and we start thinking about the future. A future where we don't live in fear of each other. A future where the truth doesn't tear us apart but brings us together." The silence that followed was heavy. No one spoke, but the weight of Robert's words hung in the air, settling on them like a cloud. Margaret's lips pressed together, and Lily could see her weighing the implications of what Robert had said. Finally, Margaret sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, Robert," she whispered, "but I don't know if we have any other choice." Lily looked at her mother-in-law, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes. Margaret had always been a pillar of strength, but now she was beginning to crack. Lily knew this wasn't going to be easy, but it was a start. The family was finally acknowledging the truth, and that was the first step toward healing. "Well then," Lily said, her voice steady but full of purpose, "let's rebuild together." The next few days were filled with awkward, strained conversations. The tension in the house was palpable, but there was also something else, something that neither Lily nor Margaret could ignore. For the first time in years, the family had been forced to confront the truth. There was no more pretending, there was no more hiding behind lies. The past was finally catching up with them, and it was clear that no one was prepared for the fallout. Lily spent most of her time in the study, going through the documents once more. She had been reviewing the financial records and the hidden transactions that had started Thomas's downfall. She knew that this would be the key to understanding what had really happened, the truth behind his disappearance and why he had faked his death. But as she read through the papers, she began to uncover even more troubling details. There were transactions that didn't make sense, accounts that had been drained, and plans that seemed to have been set in motion long before Thomas had died. The deeper she dug, the more she realized how tangled everything was. As Lily sat back in the chair, staring at the pile of papers before her, she felt a deep sense of unease. Everything Thomas had done, every decision he had made, had been aimed at protecting his family, but now it seemed that he had only complicated everything. His fear of losing control, his need to protect his legacy, had led him to make choices that were now impossible to undo. Suddenly, the door opened, and Robert stepped inside, his face unreadable. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly, his voice low. Lily put the papers aside and looked up at him. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking about everything you said," Robert started, pacing slowly across the room. "About how we need to face the truth, how we need to rebuild, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that. I don't know if I can forgive him. I don't know if I can forgive either of you." Lily's heart sank. She had known this moment would come, the moment when Robert would struggle to accept the reality of what had happened. His father had been his hero, the man he had admired and looked up to for years. But now, that hero was nothing more than a man who had deceived him and the rest of the family. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Robert," Lily said softly. "I don't even expect you to forgive Thomas. But I do expect you to see that we can't keep living in the past. We can't keep holding on to the mistakes that were made. We have to move forward, even if it's hard." Robert stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression torn. "But can we really move forward after everything? Can we rebuild this family after all the lies? After all the years of betrayal?" Lily stood up slowly, her voice steady. "We can, Robert, but only if we're willing to face the truth, and I know it's hard. I know it's painful, but if we don't start now, then we'll just keep repeating the same mistakes. The truth doesn't go away just because we ignore it." Robert looked at her for a long moment, his gaze searching her face for answers. "And what about Mom? What about Margaret? Do you think she's going to just accept this?" Lily sighed, her eyes drifting to the window. She had spent so many years trying to avoid conflict with Margaret, trying to keep the peace, but now she realized that the only way forward was to confront it head on. "Margaret's not going to accept this easily, Robert. She's spent her whole life trying to control everything, trying to keep the family together. But she's not the one who decides anymore. We all decide." Robert didn't respond right away. He walked over to the window, looking out at the sprawling grounds of the mansion. It had always been the symbol of their family's success. But now, with everything falling apart, it seemed like a facade. The perfect house, the perfect life. It was all built on lies, and now it was crumbling. "I don't know if I can do it, Lily," Robert said quietly. "I don't know if I can rebuild this family, not with everything that's happened. I don't know if I can forgive." Lily moved to stand beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to forgive right away, Robert, but you do need to make a choice. We all do. We can either keep living in the past, or we can face the truth and build something new. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it." Robert stood still for a moment, his eyes focused on the view outside. Then, slowly, he nodded. "I'll think about it." As he left the room, Lily felt a small sense of relief. She knew that Robert wasn't ready to forgive, but he was starting to see the truth. And that was the first step toward healing. Later that day, Lily found herself in the garden, sitting by the fountain that had always been a peaceful place for her. She closed her eyes, listening to the sound of the water flowing gently. She had come so far, had fought so hard to uncover the truth, but she knew the hardest part was still to come. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see Thomas standing in the doorway, his face tense. "You've been busy," he said quietly, walking toward her. Lily looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I'm trying to put things together, to understand what you did." Thomas sat down beside her, his eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone, Lily. I never wanted this. I wanted to protect you, protect the family, but I was wrong." Lily's gaze softened slightly, but the hurt was still there. "You may have thought you were protecting us, Thomas, but you were only protecting yourself, and in the end, you destroyed everything." He was silent for a long moment, as though the weight of her words had finally hit him. "I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to fix it, so I ran." Lily nodded slowly, her voice softening. "You should have trusted us, but it's too late for that now." The truth had finally come out, but the pain was far from over. They had a long road ahead of them, and there was no going back. The family had been broken, and only time would tell if it could ever be truly healed. The days that followed were filled with an uneasy quiet. The house, once bustling with the constant noise of family activities and business dealings, now felt like a hollow shell. The echoes of past arguments and quiet moments of comfort lingered in the air, but the reality of the situation was undeniable. Everything had changed. Lily knew that the time for waiting was over. She couldn't afford to keep dwelling on the past, and neither could the family. The truth had come to light, but the question now was what they would do with it. Would they let the lies continue to poison their lives, or would they face them and rebuild from the ashes? She spent the morning alone, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. The documents she had found in the study were still scattered across the table, but she knew that they held the key to the future. The truth about Thomas's disappearance, the money he had hidden away, and the lies that had been built around his death. She knew that all of it had to be exposed. But it wasn't just about uncovering the truth anymore. It was about taking control of their own destinies, about ensuring that the family's legacy wasn't tainted by years of secrets. Later that afternoon, Lily called a family meeting. She knew it was time to stop letting the tension build in the air and to start confronting the hard decisions. Margaret had already begun to withdraw even further into herself. Robert was still wrestling with his feelings of betrayal, and Kate, ever the quiet observer, seemed to be on the verge of stepping into the conversation more fully. It was time for them all to face the future, together or apart. The family gathered in the large dining room, the table set as it had been countless times before for special occasions. But today, there was no celebration, no festive atmosphere. The mood was somber, each person settling into their seat with a quiet sense of dread. Lily looked around the room, her eyes resting on each family member as they avoided her gaze. She knew that they all had questions, fears, and doubts, but it was time to put them all on the table. Margaret was the first to speak. "I know why you've called us here, Lily," she said, her voice sharp but weary. "You think you can just come back and take over everything, but you're wrong. You've already caused enough damage." Lily met her mother-in-law's gaze with unwavering calm. "I'm not here to take over anything, Margaret. I'm here to face the truth. And the truth is, we can't keep going on like this. We can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not." Margaret's face twisted with frustration, but she didn't respond immediately. Instead, her eyes flickered to Thomas, who had remained silent up until this point. He shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, but finally spoke. "I never wanted things to end up like this," Thomas said, his voice filled with regret. "I thought I was protecting you all, but I was wrong. I should have faced the truth a long time ago." Lily's gaze softened slightly as she looked at him. "It's too late for apologies, Thomas. We need to think about what happens next. We've been living in the shadows of your mistakes for too long, and we can't keep pretending they don't matter." Robert, who had been sitting silently beside Margaret, finally spoke. His voice was strained, his emotions still raw. "I don't know if I can do this, Lily," he admitted. "I don't know if I can just let everything go. The lies, the deceit, it's all too much." Lily's heart tightened at the pain in Robert's voice. She had known this would be hard, but hearing his vulnerability made her realize just how deep the wounds ran. You don't have to let it go, Robert. You don't have to forgive me or anyone else right now. But you do need to decide what you want your future to look like. We all do." Margaret's voice was tight, barely controlled. "You're asking us to just forget everything, to pretend it never happened." "I'm not asking you to forget," Lily replied gently. "I'm asking you to stop letting the past control us. The truth is out. It's painful, it's ugly, but it's here. Now we have to decide if we're going to let it destroy us or if we're going to build something new from it." The room fell silent as each person absorbed her words. No one spoke for several moments, each person lost in their own thoughts. It was Kate who finally broke the silence. She had been quiet throughout most of the meeting, but now her voice was clear, though tinged with uncertainty. "I think we need to stop pretending," Kate said softly, looking at her mother and brother. "I think we need to look at what we've become and ask ourselves if this is really the family we want to be." Lily's eyes softened as she looked at her sister-in-law. Kate had always been the one to avoid conflict, to stay in the background. But now she was speaking up, and Lily could see that Kate was finally seeing the bigger picture, the picture that had eluded them all for so long. "I agree," Robert said, his voice quieter now, but firm. "I don't know how we fix this, but I know we can't keep living like this. We have to make a choice." Lily nodded slowly, her heart filled with a quiet sense of hope. For the first time in days, it felt like the family was starting to listen, starting to understand that the only way forward was through the truth. "We can fix this," Lily said softly, "but we have to do it together, all of us. No more secrets, no more lies, just the truth." Margaret's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but for the first time, Lily saw a hint of something else in her expression. Acceptance. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a step. A small one, but a step nonetheless. "Fine," Margaret said finally, her voice still cold but tinged with something else. "But don't expect it to be easy," Lily nodded. "I don't expect it to be easy, but we'll get through it. Together." For the first time in a long while, Lily felt the weight in her chest ease, just slightly. The path ahead was uncertain, and the challenges they would face would be immense, but at least now they were ready to face them. Together. The next few days felt like a strange limbo. No one quite knew what to do with themselves, as if they were all waiting for something to happen, but unsure what that something was. The truth had come to light, but now they had to figure out what to do with it. The house, which had once felt like a fortress of power and control, now felt like a place of reckoning. The walls were closing in on all of them, and the weight of the family's secrets seemed almost unbearable. Lily continued to sift through the documents, the papers that held the key to everything. They were scattered across her desk, each one telling a story of deceit, manipulation, and fear. She had never imagined that she would be sitting here, looking at them, knowing that her life and the lives of her family members were about to change forever. The deeper she dug, the more she uncovered, and she realized that Thomas had been far more involved in the family's downfall than anyone had initially suspected. She had always known that there were things Thomas kept hidden, but she had never imagined the extent of it. The financial dealings, the secret accounts, the plans to move vast sums of money, all of it had been done to keep the family's empire intact, but it was done in the most reckless way possible. Thomas had done what he thought was necessary, but in doing so, he had set them all on a path that was now impossible to undo. As Lily sat in the study, absorbed in the details of Thomas's financial dealings, the door creaked open. She didn't look up at first, but the voice that followed made her pause. "Lily, we need to talk." Lily turned in her chair to see Robert standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His eyes, though, held a mixture of sadness and determination. It was the look of someone who had come to a painful realization. "What is it, Robert?" Lily asked, her voice quiet but steady. Robert stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "I've been thinking about everything," he said, his voice low. "About Thomas, about the family, about us. And I think I finally understand why you did what you did." Lily's heart sank. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Robert would begin to see the bigger picture, when he would begin to understand why she had kept so much from him. But she hadn't expected it to come so soon, and certainly not like this. "I don't expect forgiveness, Robert," Lily said, her voice soft but firm. "I never have. But I do want you to understand why I kept the truth from you. It wasn't because I wanted to hurt you. It was because I didn't think you were ready for it." Robert looked at her, his gaze steady now. "I get it," he said. "I do. You were trying to protect us. But I think I was wrong, too. I think I was too focused on the past, too focused on trying to keep everything together. I didn't see the damage we were doing. I didn't see that we were all just pretending." Lily stood up and walked over to him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "It's not too late, Robert. We can still fix this. But we have to do it together." Robert's eyes softened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he smiled. It was small, but it was real. "I know," he said quietly. "I just don't know where to start." Lily nodded. "We start with the truth. We start by acknowledging what's been done and what we've lost. Then we figure out how to rebuild." There was a moment of silence between them, and then Robert spoke again, his voice a little rougher this time. "Do you think Mom will ever accept this? Do you think she'll ever let go of the past?" Lily sighed, her heart aching for the woman who had once been so powerful in her life. "I don't know. Margaret's been living in her own world for so long that I'm not sure she knows how to let go. But I think she's starting to see the truth. I think deep down, she knows this family can't keep going the way it has." Robert took a deep breath and looked out the window, his gaze distant. "I don't know if I'm ready to forgive her, but I know I can't keep carrying all this anger. I can't keep carrying all this resentment." Lily's eyes softened as she looked at her son. "It's a long road, Robert. Forgiveness doesn't come easily. But I promise you, it will come when you're ready." For a moment, the two of them stood in silence, both lost in their thoughts. The house outside seemed so quiet, as though it too was waiting for something to change. Lily knew that the journey ahead would be anything but easy. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. They could rebuild. The family could heal. But only if they were willing to face the past and start again. That night, after a long day of uncomfortable conversations, Lily found herself sitting in the garden again, staring at the stars. She felt the cool evening air against her skin, the quiet serenity of the night helping to ease the weight of the day's events. She knew that things would never be the same. But in that moment, she felt more at peace than she had in years. Footsteps approached, and Lily turned to see Thomas walking toward her, his face full of quiet determination. He sat down beside her, and for a long while neither of them spoke. The night stretched on, each of them lost in their thoughts. Finally, Thomas broke the silence. "I don't know how we got here, Lily. I don't know how everything got so broken." Lily smiled faintly. "We got here because we were too afraid to face the truth. We were too afraid to admit that we were falling apart." Thomas nodded slowly. "And now?" Lily turned to him, her eyes softening. "Now we face it, and we rebuild." For the first time in a long while, Thomas seemed to understand. He nodded, his face solemn but hopeful. They had a long road ahead of them, but at least now they were on the same path, together. The next few days were marked by cautious steps forward. The family began to emerge from the chaos of the past, though it felt like they were walking through a fog, unsure of where they were headed. The truth had been exposed, but it wasn't just about uncovering the lies, it was about finding a way to move forward without losing themselves in the process. Lily knew that the family was fractured, but it wasn't beyond repair, not if they all decided to face the truth head-on. Robert, though still carrying his resentment, had started to engage more openly with Lily. The walls he had built around himself were slowly crumbling, brick by brick. He would sit with her in the evenings, discussing what needed to be done next, planning how they could rebuild the business that had been Thomas's legacy. It wasn't easy for him, but Lily saw the change in him, a shift toward acceptance, even if it was just a small one. Margaret, on the other hand, remained distant. She hadn't spoken much since the family meeting, and Lily knew she was struggling to come to terms with everything that had been revealed. Margaret had built her life around control, and now, with everything unraveling, she was forced to confront the fact that the empire she had helped create was no longer hers to command. It was hard to watch, but Lily knew Margaret had to go through this alone, at least for a while. There was no room for pretending anymore. One evening, as the sun began to set, Lily found herself sitting on the balcony, her thoughts drifting back to the night Thomas had disappeared. She still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, things she hadn't uncovered yet. She hadn't asked Thomas everything. Maybe it was time to have that conversation. As if on cue, Thomas appeared at the door, his face etched with weariness. "You're still up," he remarked quietly, walking over to join her on the balcony. Lily turned to him, offering a small smile. "I can't seem to stop thinking about everything." "I know," he said softly, sitting down beside her. "There's a lot to take in. Too much, maybe?" "I keep wondering if there's more," Lily admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "More that you didn't tell me, more that you didn't want me to know." Thomas looked down at his hands, his fingers fidgeting nervously. "I did what I thought was right at the time, Lily. I didn't want to bring you into all of it. I didn't want to drag you into a mess that wasn't yours to clean up." "You were already dragging me into it," Lily replied, her tone gentle but firm. "By hiding everything, by keeping the truth from me." He sighed heavily, his gaze drifting out over the sprawling gardens. "I know, but I didn't know how else to protect you." Lily shook her head slowly. "You couldn't protect me by hiding the truth. All you did was make it worse." The silence between them stretched on as they both sat there, lost in their thoughts. Thomas's past decisions had left scars, and though Lily could see the regret in his eyes, she knew the healing process wouldn't be easy. They had both been living in a world of half-truths for too long. "What happens now?" Thomas finally asked, his voice hoarse. "What do we do now?" Lily turned to him, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "We move forward. We face the truth. We rebuild. But we do it together." Thomas nodded, his expression softening. He didn't have all the answers, and neither did Lily, but for the first time he felt a sense of clarity. There was a way forward, and they would find it, even if it meant facing their past head-on. The following week, the family came together again, this time with a more deliberate sense of purpose. Lily had called a meeting, not just to discuss the family business, but to address the personal changes that needed to happen. There could be no more silence, no more pretending. The future of the family, both the business and the relationships, depended on them finally acknowledging the past. Margaret, though still quiet and distant, had agreed to attend. Lily knew that her presence wasn't a sign of forgiveness, but it was a sign of something else, acceptance. She had come to realize, perhaps too late, that there was no controlling the situation anymore. The empire she had helped build was no longer just hers, and the family business had to evolve. Robert, who had been more involved in discussions about the business, now seemed ready to take the next step, whatever that might be. He had his reservations, but there was a growing understanding between him and Lily. They had both been hurt, but they had also both seen that rebuilding was possible. The key was to work together, not against each other. As the family sat around the table, the weight of the moment hung in the air. No one spoke at first, and for a moment It felt as though they were all waiting for someone else to make the first move. It was Margaret who broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you all think I've been avoiding this," she began, her eyes meeting each of their gazes. "And I suppose I have. But I also know that we can't keep living like this. We can't keep pretending that everything is fine when it's not. I've made mistakes, and I'm willing to face the consequences." Lily's heart swelled slightly as she heard Margaret's words. She had known that this moment would be difficult for her, but hearing her finally acknowledge the truth was a step forward. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something more, an acknowledgement that they couldn't move forward until they faced what had happened. "I know this won't be easy," Margaret continued, her voice stronger now. "But I'm willing to try. I don't want to lose this family." Robert looked at Margaret, his expression softening. "I'm willing to try too," he said, his voice steady. "I don't know how we fix everything, but I know we can't keep going on like this." Lily watched as her family began to come together, each of them acknowledging their flaws and their mistakes. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was a beginning. It was a start toward something new. "We rebuild then," Lily said quietly, her voice full of purpose. "But we do it together. We face everything that's been hidden, everything that's been broken, and we fix it." The room was silent for a moment, and then, one by one, the family members nodded. It wasn't a promise that everything would be easy, but it was a promise to try, to work together to heal the wounds that had been festering for so long. In the weeks that followed, things began to shift. Slowly but surely the family started to find their footing again. Margaret, while still guarded and wary, began to show a willingness to engage more openly with Lily. They didn't agree on everything, but there was a mutual respect that hadn't been there before. Margaret started to take small steps toward accepting the changes, though it was clear that she was still struggling with the loss of control. Robert, too, began to change. The bitterness that had clouded his thoughts was slowly replaced with a sense of responsibility. He was no longer just reacting to the events around him, but actively participating in the rebuilding of the family legacy. It wasn't easy for him, but he was learning to trust Lily again, to see her not just as his mother's rival, but as someone who had fought for their family's future, just as he had. Kate, ever the quiet one, began to emerge as a voice of reason within the family. She had always been observant, but now she was beginning to take a more active role in the decisions that were being made. She had learned to speak up, to share her opinions, and her presence was becoming increasingly influential. Lily continued to work closely with them all, but there was a sense of resolve in her now. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she also knew that they were on the right path. Together they could rebuild not just the business, but their relationships as well. One afternoon, as Lily sat in her study, she received a call from one of their top financial advisors. The call was about the restructuring of the company, the plans to move forward after the scandal. As she listened to the details, a sense of pride washed over her. They were moving forward, slowly but surely, despite the challenges. When the call ended, she sat back in her chair, her mind drifting. It had been a long road, and the family wasn't out of the woods yet, but she could see a glimmer of hope on the horizon. They had faced the truth, and now they were building something new, a future that was stronger and more honest than the one they had before. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Weeks turned into months, and while the road to healing was slow, there was no denying that things were starting to shift. The tension that had once hung thick in the air of the mansion had lightened, though it was still fragile. Margaret, though reluctant, had begun to open up more, her sharp edges softened by time and necessity. She had always been the pillar of control in the family, the one who ensured everything went according to plan. But now, as Lily had always known, that control was a double-edged sword, and learning to relinquish it was proving harder than she had ever imagined. For the first time, Margaret began to lean on Lily, asking for her opinion in ways she never had before. It wasn't always comfortable, but it was a sign of progress. There were still moments of resistance, moments when old habits resurfaced, but Lily could see that her mother-in-law was trying. Robert, too, had begun to settle into his role within the family business. His earlier anger had been replaced with a sense of responsibility, and though the weight of leadership was still daunting, he was starting to understand just how much of a role he had to play in rebuilding the family legacy. He was no longer just reacting to the past. He was actively shaping the future. Kate had stepped up in ways no one expected. Quiet and reserved for most of her life, she had become a voice of reason, offering insights and solutions when the family needed them most. Lily had always known that Kate had more to offer than she let on, and now it was clear to everyone. She had become not just a member of the family, but an integral part of the decision-making process. Lily, as the glue that held it all together, found herself in a strange position. She had always been the outsider in this family, the one who had been pushed out and forgotten. But now she had taken her place, not just as the wife of Thomas, but as a force for change. The family trusted her now in ways they hadn't before. They had seen her strength, her resolve, and her willingness to fight for what was right. And while the scars of the past still lingered, there was a sense of unity growing within the family. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings and discussions, Lily found herself sitting alone in the garden, watching the sun set over the horizon. It had been a busy week, filled with decisions about the restructuring of the business, discussions about the future of the family estate, and the ongoing efforts to mend the fractured relationships that had once seemed beyond repair. As she sat there, her thoughts drifted back to the moment when everything had fallen apart. The night Thomas had disappeared, the pain of being cast aside, the years of silence that had followed. It felt like a lifetime ago, but in many ways it still haunted her. She wasn't sure how much time had passed when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Thomas approaching, his face tired but calm. He had been quieter lately, less anxious, but still carrying the weight of his past decisions. "Thinking about everything?" Thomas asked, standing beside her. Lily nodded, her gaze fixed on the fading light. "I can't help it. It feels like the past is always there, hovering just out of reach, like we can never truly escape it." Thomas sat down beside her, his presence comforting but tinged with sadness. "I don't think we can ever truly escape it," he said quietly. "But we can learn from it. We can take what we've been through and use it to build something better. It won't be easy, but it'll be worth it." Lily turned to him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of understanding and resolve. "I think you're right. But we have to keep moving forward. We can't keep looking back." Thomas reached out and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "We will. Together." For the first time in a long while, Lily felt a sense of peace settle over her. The journey had been long and painful, but they had made it through. And now, with the truth finally out in the open, they could begin to rebuild, not just the family business, but their relationships, not just the empire, but the family itself. There was still a long way to go, but they were on the right path. Together, they could face whatever came next. In the months that followed, the family slowly began to heal. It wasn't a quick or easy process, and there were still moments of tension, moments when old wounds were reopened. But the foundation had been laid, and they were building something new, something better. Margaret, though still distant at times, had started to relinquish some of her control. She and Lily had spent more time together, working on the business and discussing the future of the family. There were still times when old habits crept in, but Margaret was learning to trust Lily more. It wasn't easy, but it was progress. Robert had become more comfortable in his role, taking on more responsibility within the family business. He and Lily had developed a strong, working relationship, one that wasn't built on resentment, but on mutual respect. Robert had come to see that Lily wasn't his enemy, she was an ally. And though he still had a long way to go in terms of forgiveness, he was finally learning to let go of the anger that had held him back. Kate, too, had grown more confident. She had found her voice in the family, contributing ideas and solutions that helped the family move forward. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was an integral part of the decision-making process. As the family worked together to rebuild, they found themselves facing new challenges, but they also found themselves growing stronger as a unit. They were learning to communicate, to support each other, and to build something that was based on trust rather than secrecy. Lily, for her part, had become the steady force that held it all together. She had learned to let go of the past, to forgive those who had wronged her, and to focus on the future. The family was no longer divided by secrets and lies. They were united by the truth, and that truth was what would guide them moving forward. One evening, as they gathered in the dining room for a quiet family dinner, Lily looked around at the faces of her family. It wasn't perfect, not by any means, but it was real. The cracks in their relationships were still visible, but they were no longer hiding behind them. They were learning to heal, to forgive, and to move forward. Thomas, sitting beside her, smiled softly. "It's a start," he said quietly. Lily nodded, her eyes meeting his. "Yes, it is." And for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. The road ahead would be difficult, but they would face it together. And that was all that mattered. The family's journey wasn't over yet. In fact, it had only just begun. But as the weeks passed, they found themselves in a better place than they had been in years. The trust that had been broken was slowly being rebuilt piece by piece. Each conversation, each decision, each moment of vulnerability was a step toward healing. Lily had spent countless hours working with Robert and the rest of the family, trying to steer the business back on course. It hadn't been easy, and there were setbacks along the way, but they had made progress. The financial restructuring had taken months of careful planning, but they had managed to stabilize the company. It wasn't where it had been before Thomas's disappearance, but it was stronger now, built on a foundation of honesty. Margaret, though still struggling with her role in the family, had finally begun to accept that she couldn't control everything. She had started to allow others to take the lead, trusting them to make the decisions that were best for the family. It had been a hard lesson for her, but one that she had finally begun to accept. As the family gathered one evening in the study to discuss the final steps of the business restructuring, Lily felt a sense of calm settle over her. They were no longer just trying to fix the past, they were actively creating a new future. Robert looked at her, his face serious, but no longer clouded by anger. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" Lily smiled, her eyes filled with quiet pride. "Yes, we have, but we still have a long way to go." Margaret, sitting across from them, nodded. "We've all made mistakes, but I think we're finally learning to make the right decisions." Thomas, sitting beside Lily, gave her a small smile. "It's a new beginning." Lily looked around the room at the people who had once been so fractured, so divided. And though the scars of the past would always remain, she knew that they had done the hard work of healing. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, they were facing it together. As the months continued to pass, the family found themselves in a more stable place. There were still moments of tension, of course, but they had learned how to navigate those moments with a new understanding, a new willingness to listen and compromise. The past, while still painful, was no longer an insurmountable barrier to their future. Lily had taken a significant role in the restructuring of the business, working side by side with Robert to ensure the company's future was secure. They had learned to trust one another, building a partnership that was based on respect rather than the resentment that had once poisoned their relationship. It hadn't been easy for either of them, but over time, they had become a team. One that was strong, capable, and unafraid to face the challenges ahead. Margaret, though still somewhat distant at times, had started to show signs of true change. She was no longer the domineering matriarch who controlled every aspect of the family. Instead, she had taken a more supportive role, offering guidance when needed, but allowing Robert, Lily, and even Kate to take the lead. It wasn't easy for her to let go of control, but she had begun to understand that the family could not move forward without the cooperation of everyone. Kate, once the quiet observer, had found her place in the family. She had always been smart, but now she was finally being heard. Her ideas, her insights, were being valued in ways they never had before. It was a transformation that had taken everyone by surprise, and even Margaret had begun to respect Kate's voice in the decision-making process. As they gathered in the dining room for another family dinner, the atmosphere was different. The tension that had once filled the house had faded, replaced by a sense of calm. The past was no longer a shadow that hung over them, but a lesson they had all learned from. And while the future was still uncertain, they were facing it together, with honesty, trust, and a shared commitment to rebuild what had once been broken. Robert, sitting beside Lily, glanced around the table. His eyes met hers, and for a moment a silent understanding passed between them. The road they had traveled had been difficult, but it had brought them to a place where they could finally move forward. "It's a new chapter," Robert said quietly, his voice filled with a mix of hope and reflection. "We're not the same people we were before, and maybe that's a good thing." Lily nodded, her eyes softening as she looked at him. "We're not the same, but that doesn't mean we can't be better." Margaret, sitting at the head of the table, smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I suppose it's true," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "We can't change the past, but we can shape the future." Kate, who had been quiet up until now, spoke with quiet conviction. "We can rebuild this family, not just the business, but the relationships too." Lily looked around the table at the faces of the people she had once thought she would never be able to trust again. They had all come so far, and while the scars of the past were still there, they were no longer the defining features of their relationships. They were moving forward, slowly, cautiously, but together. "We rebuild together," Lily said softly, her heart filled with a quiet sense of peace, "and we make it stronger than before." The family shared a moment of silence, each of them lost in their thoughts. For the first time in a long time, Lily felt hopeful. There was still work to be done, but they were no longer trapped in the past. They had faced the truth, and now they had a chance to build something new, something lasting. It was several months later when Lily stood in the grand study of the mansion, looking out the window at the family estate. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the gardens and the sprawling grounds. It felt surreal, like the past had been a distant memory, a chapter in a book that had already been written. The family had come a long way, and while there were still challenges to face, they had built something real. The business was stable, the relationships were healing, and they had learned to put the past behind them. There was a sense of unity now, a sense of purpose that hadn't existed before. Lily turned as the door creaked open, and she saw Thomas standing in the doorway, his expression soft, but his eyes full of pride. "You look out there like you're thinking about something," Thomas said quietly, walking over to join her by the window. Lily smiled faintly, her gaze still on the horizon. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, about how much we've been through, and how much we've rebuilt." Thomas nodded, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "We've come a long way, and we're not done yet, but we've made it through the hardest part." Lily turned to face him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and reflection. "We've made it through together, and that's what matters." The two of them stood there in silence, looking out over the estate that had once been the symbol of everything that had gone wrong. But now it was a symbol of something else, of resilience, of healing, of a family that had come together despite everything. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the mansion in a golden light, Lily felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was theirs to walk, together. And as they faced the future, they knew one thing for certain. They had rebuilt not just a family but a legacy built on the truth, on trust, and on the strength to face whatever challenges came next.